Welcome to Turkistan TV News. The Beijing Olympics goes down in the history as the worst public relations disaster ever. T5 Global News. If the ongoing Beijing Winter Olympics was a PR exercise for China, it's bound to go down as the worst PR exercise by the country in recent times. And we have our reasons to claim this. From manhandling a Dutch television reporter just outside the Winter Olympic opening ceremony to further agonizing its rivals like India and South Korea. China has done everything that it could have done to show its ugly face to the world at the Beijing Winter Olympics. China's grand show at Beijing Winter Olympics was supposed to reinvigorate business ties with countries like South Korea that are looking to decouple from China for the past 2 years. But all the Beijing has managed to do is to annoy the Koreans. A conservative South Korean civic group even tore up China's flag during a rally near the Chinese embassy in Seoul on Friday. They were protesting against controversial refereeing against some South Korean short track speed skaters on ongoing Winter Olympics. The protesters demanded that China apologize for biased refereeing at the Winter Olympics. And the protesters were also angry about the silence of their government against Beijing's unfair actions. In the men's 1,000-meter semifinals on Monday, South Korean Hwang Dae-hyo and Lee Jun-seo got disqualified from their respective heats for the illegal pass and lane change respectively. After these decisions, Chinese skaters were able to reach the final and grab the gold and silver medals. As if this wasn't enough, South Korea also got angry about the cultural appropriation by China. A performer at the opening ceremony wore a traditional Korean dress called hanbok. China was clearly trying to pass off the Korean attire as its own, which has stoked anti-Chinese sentiment in South Korea. Both social media and the mainstream media in the country have criticized China's brash behavior. Even the center-left Han New York newspaper condemned China's actions and stated, "We need to continue developing neighborly relations with China, but we also need to be willing to stand up against attempts to distort history." Cultural appropriation by China is a long-standing issue in South Korea. China has been passing off South Korean culture as its own since 2000 years. It has passed off South Korea's kimchi dish as Chinese food. Even last year, the South Koreans vented online about the Chinese search engine Baidu's act of listing a number of Korean foods, such as kimchi and samyetang, as cuisines of Chinese origin. China rubs India and Russia in the wrong way. South Korea is not the only country on Beijing's agenda. It also wanted to repair its bruised image in India and affirm a sentiment of friendship with Moscow. But just before the Beijing Winter Olympics, China made a huge mistake. It decided to play mind games with India by making a soldier, Chi Fa-bao, involved in the Galwan Valley clash with the Indian army last year as its peak for the torchbearer at the upcoming games. But just before the Beijing Winter Olympics, China made a huge mistake. It decided to play mind games with India by making a soldier, Chi Fa-bao, involved in the Galwan Valley clash with the Indian army last year as its pick for the torchbearer at the upcoming games. India announced a full diplomatic boycott of Winter Olympics. It had every reason to do so. The entire episode also ended up embittering Sino-Russian ties. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has been trying to play a mediator between India and China, and China's actions came out looking like an effort to undermine Putin's desired mediator role. And therefore, Putin too decided to humiliate China during the Beijing Winter Olympics. Here's what Putin did to Xi Jinping and CCP during his visit to China. Putin kept his visit to Beijing extremely short. Putin didn't attend the lavish state banquet organized by Xi Jinping for all heads of states that visited Beijing for the Winter Olympics opening ceremony. The Putin was considered most important guest in the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics. Yet, the venue of Xi Jinping's meeting with Putin on Friday 4 was only Diaoyutai State Guest House, not in the Great Hall of the People. This either shows China wanted to show Putin who the boss is, or that Putin refused to meet Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People, where the state banquet was held. Putin made it stunningly clear to Xi Jinping that Moscow's tie with India will always prioritized over Russia's relations with China. China's Uyghur propaganda backfires. The Winter Olympics opening ceremony saw very low viewership across the world. But there was a major highlight during the event: Chinese propaganda about its humane treatment of Uyghurs. Yes, after killing, raping, and torturing millions of Uyghurs in East Turkestan, so-called Chinese Xinjiang province, Beijing actually had the temerity to field country's scared Dinigeer Yilamujiang as one of the cauldron lighters. The Chinese state media proudly claimed that Yilamujiang has Uyghur heritage. But where is Yilamujiang now? Well, having used the Uyghur woman for the sheer propaganda, China has now sidetracked her. After her Olympics debut on Saturday, Yilamujiang avoided the media and slipped away through the mixed zone along with other Chinese athletes. She has disappeared, and Chinese authorities have declined to comment on her sudden disappearance from the media limelight. China's Uyghur propaganda has therefore fallen flat on its face. China caught censoring foreign media. And if there was any doubt about China's cruel character, it was telecast live on Friday when China hosted the Winter Olympics opening ceremony at the Bird's Nest in Beijing. A Dutch television reporter was literally manhandled and stopped from presenting live on the air just outside the venue. The journalist Sir Dendas could be heard saying, "We are now being pulled out of here." He added, "We have just been expelled from another area, so I'm afraid we'll have to come back to you later." So, the harsh atmosphere for foreign and private media in China was caught live. This may well have been a brash attempt by Chinese authorities to censor foreign journalists, and that too without any reason. For China, the Winter Olympics were the means of controlling the damage done to its own image over the years. But China has only ended up affirming its cruel, selfish, and intolerant image. This is quite clearly a terrible public relations exercise on the communist country's part. We know a genocide is being committed there. United States ambassador says China using an Uyghur athlete as Olympic torchbearer is effort to distract us. Business Insider News. China said a torchbearer at the Olympics opening ceremony was an Uyghur. The Uyghurs have been subject to human rights abuses in China. The United States ambassador to the United Nations said it was meant to distract from the genocide in East Turkestan. The United States ambassador said China's choice to have an Uyghur athlete as a torchbearer during the Olympic opening ceremony for the 2022 Winter Games was an attempt to distract from the human rights abuse against the Turkic Muslims. We've made our position very clear on the situation in China. This is not business as usual. United States Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield told CNN's State of Union on Sunday, "We know that a genocide has been committed there." Dinigeer Yilamujiang, a cross-country skier, who the Chinese said is an Uyghur, was chosen to light Olympic cauldron on Friday. The choice to have Yilamujiang as a torchbearer comes as China faces criticism for human rights abuse against Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan. On Sunday, Thomas Greenfield told CNN that Yilamujiang's presence at the Olympics as a torchbearer doesn't change China's treatment of Uyghurs or the United States' position on human rights abuses. It's important that the audience that participated and witnessed this understand that this doesn't take away from what we know is happening on the ground there, she said. Human Rights Watch said the Chinese Communist Party has detained as many as 1 million Uyghur Muslims in hundreds of prisons and detention centers in East Turkestan and the surrounding region. People who have been inside the centers, either as visitor, employee, or inmate, have spoken of forced consumption of forbidden foods in Islam, such as pork, mass surveillance, and various other forms of psychological and physical torture. This is an effort by Chinese to distract us from the real issue here at hand, that Uyghurs are being tortured, and Uyghurs are victims of human rights violations by Chinese, and we have to keep that front and center, Thomas Greenfield said. Whatever from East Turkestan TV News reported.